Joining us for the second installment of Briefing with the Bosses. I appreciate you joining us, and I'm grateful to Tony Guzzi, our Vice President of Site Operations, for joining us this morning, and thank you for your interest as well. For those of you I have not met, I am Andy Jones, Vice President of Marketing Communications for Andrew Jackson's Hermitage. I will moderate this discussion and ask the questions that all of you submitted that relate to Tony's day-to-day operations. If you have additional questions, I ask that you use the chat feature and send those questions to us, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. For any that we're not able to address, we will get back to you via email. I would like to tell you that this discussion is being recorded so that we can put this on our website, available for everybody to watch at a later date. And as always, be sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and our website so that you keep up with the latest updates and offerings. So Tony, if you are ready, we will get started.
I'm ready. I just want to say, though, that the director of the Andrew Jackson Papers Project is on this call, so I'm going to be nervous the whole time that I might say something wrong. Hi, Dan.
All right. Our first question came from Tim Gerard, who submitted two questions. His first one is, what item has the most historical and or cultural significance?
Well, for me personally, some of my favorite items in terms of historical significance are the political cartoons that we have here. And the one I like the most is this one. I'll show it to you all. So if you all can see this on my screen here, I'll put it on full screen. This is Andrew Jackson, a political cartoon of him called "The Rats Leaving a Falling House," and its historical significance is it deals with the Eaton affair, which was a social scandal about Peggy Eaton, who had married Jackson's Secretary of War, and John Eaton, and the social scandal was that Mrs. Eaton had come from a questionable background. I won't go into too much detail, but this created a social scandal that turned political and divided Jackson's cabinet. And the eventual solution to it was that Jackson's cabinet was, many of the folks were resigned after Martin Van Buren offered his resignation. And so this cartoon shows all of his cabinets running away from Jackson, and the only one he's really trying to stop was Martin Van Buren, who was Jackson's favorite. That's why Jackson has his foot on Van Buren's tail. And Jackson had gone into office saying that he was going to reform government. In fact, one of the symbols of the campaign was a broom. And so you can see there next to Jackson the altar of reform. And there's this winged demon on it with a broom. And so during all this Eaton affair, the altar of reform is toppling, and this winged demon is brushing away is sweeping out the corruption. So that's one of my favorite items here.
Perfect. All right, Tim's second question is, we had a few questions kind of related to this. What item has the most historical and or cultural significance?
I think we ask that one already?
Oh, yes, we did. Sorry. Your favorite urban myth concerning the grounds or historical figures associated with the Hermitage?
I think one of my favorite urban myths is that that there was early on some confusion that when Teddy Roosevelt came to Nashville and said "good to the last drop" about Maxwell House coffee, that was actually here at the Hermitage, but I believe it was at the Maxwell House Hotel is the coffee that they were talking about. So that's one of my favorite urban myths.
Okay. What about the most unique item in the Hermitage collection?
I think one of the most unique items is something that's just a little odd looking. Jackson was always being given canes by people. And, they were, canes that people gave. Sometimes they were made from pieces of wood that came from something significant. For example, one of them was a vine that grew over George Washington's grave. But one of the most unique items is a cane that he was given that was called a chair cane. And basically the cane folds into a tripod, and you can put it like your cloak or your coat over it and use it as a chair. And we all look at this thing and say, we don't understand how it could have ever supported anyone's weight, because it's just this little thin cane. But in theory, the thing worked, and Jackson actually used it. So the chair cane is certainly one of the most unique items that we have in the collection.
Is that out for people to see?
It actually is. It's in the front parlor. So if you ever come to the Hermitage, you can see it sitting there. And it literally looks like a tripod, and you'll look at it and wonder, how could that little thing ever support a full-grown man's weight?
All right, Elizabeth Thomas would like to know an anecdotal or uplifting story from the.
My favorite story from the estate that I consider it to be uplifting because it just symbolizes hope is the story of Alfred Jackson. There was a tutor that came here to work with Andrew Jackson Jr.'s children. And while he was here, he got to be friends with Alfred Jackson. And this tutor was from the North, and he was really trying to understand slavery. His name was Rolif Brinkerhoff. And one day he was sort of quizzing Alfred and talking to Alfred about, Alfred's job was that he often served as the wagon driver. And so to Brinkerhoff, when he saw what Alfred did, he thought that Alfred had it a little better than some of the other slaves because he had more freedom. He got to drive into Nashville and pick things up and move around more liberally. So Brinkerhoff one day is sort of going on about, hey, Alfred, you're a slave here, but you really don't, it's really not that bad on you. It's you've got a good situation. And Alfred just sort of ends the conversation by saying, yes, but I'm still not free. And so that story to me is uplifting because it shows that despite being enslaved, Alfred still hoped to be free, and he eventually would become free during the Civil War. So that's the most uplifting story that I have from the Hermitage.
Okay. Linda Mansour she said, I've always been fascinated by the amount of newspapers that Andrew Jackson read and had bound. Are there any notations from him on those pages?
So we have some Washington Globes in the collection that Jackson apparently kept and bound them into volumes and brought them back here to Nashville with him once he left the White House. And in those, there are a few notations, but sometimes if you don't know the context, you really that Jackson was writing it, you don't really understand what the notations mean. One of the curators told me that there is one pamphlet in the collection about Thomas Hart Benton and the Bank War that Jackson had made numerous marks on, but unfortunately we couldn't find the image of it and look at it again before the conference. So I'm not able. I was going to show you a picture and let you see what all was on it, but we weren't able to find it. So.
Okay. Stephen Burns asked, what original building material at the Hermitage Church survives?
Well, for that one, I can actually show you a picture. So let me pull that up.
For those that don't know, Tony, what year was the church built?
Sure. The church was built in 1823 and finished up in 1824. It was built, Jackson gave part of the money for it, and he gave the land, but other neighbors helped chip in and pay for it. And it was really sort of a community meeting house, church, and school in its early days. It was called the Ephesian Church at first. Later on, once Jackson joined the church, they decided to, when he joined the church in 1838, they decided to rename it to the Hermitage Church. And this church became a Presbyterian church in the 1830s. Originally, it was non-denominational. And it continued to be a functioning church with that congregation until the fire that damaged it in 1965. And it really gutted the entire building. So if you all can see the picture, you can see what was left of the church after the fire. It was just the brick walls. And so after the fire, the Andrew Jackson Foundation purchased the church, and they set about restoring it to what it looked like somewhat in Jackson's day. Most of the restoration of the church is correct. There are a few items on it that, if you look at it today, really represent how the church looked in the 1890s. But this is what the church looked like just a few days after the fire that gutted it. So, but those brick walls are still there. You can walk up to the church like today. If you look there on the front of the church, you can see the brick arches above the doorways that originally, when the church was built, those brick arches were windows, and the doors to the church were actually around on the side. And the little building there off to the right of the church was a Sunday school that was demolished after the Ladies' Hermitage, or the Andrew Jackson Foundation, took over the church.
Very interesting. And if you're interested in a little bit more about the church, Tony did do a Facebook Live for us at the church, so you can find that on our Facebook page if you want to know more of that. All right, we have 3 questions from Angie. She would like to know what's next for preservation or restoration, and will we ever have a presidential library?
So those of you who don't know, Angie once worked here, and I worked with her for a couple of years, and she's there with her kids. So what is the next preservation project? Well, we hope it's the next big preservation project is not one that's very glamorous or one that people can see, but the most important thing we need to do is replace the boiler that operates the heat in the Hermitage Mansion. It's getting very old. It needs to be replaced. And we also need to install new humidifiers to keep the humidity in the wintertime at a more controlled and safer level. And we also need to install another air handler that will provide humidity and heat and air in a better fashion to the hallways. So, like I said, it's not very glamorous or something that most people will even see, but it is vitally important to the long-term preservation of not only the house, but the objects inside it. That's sort of one of the unique things about the Hermitage Mansion is it's a historic house that honestly would much rather just not have any air conditioning and just a little bit of heat in the winter. That would be the best thing to do for the house. But because the house itself is in essence a museum holding historic objects, most of them being original, we have to sort of strike a balance between what the house needs for its preservation what the objects need for their preservation and conservation, and then what the people need to be able to see the collection. So we're trying to always walk a fine line to give as much access to people and at the same time preserve everything that's in the house.
What about a presidential library?
A presidential library. Well, I don't know that we would ever necessarily need a presidential library. Mr. Feller, who's listening, has been working on processing all of Jackson's letters and editing them and putting them into volumes of books that folks can access online now. They can access, they can actually buy the volumes. They can go to libraries and read that. And so most of, what people think of a presidential library actually doing is being somewhat an exhibit hall, but they also contain the president's actual papers. So here, Jackson's papers are, for the most part, at the Library of Congress and at a few other places. So there isn't any really need to build a center to hold Jackson's papers. But at some point we may do a presidential center that does exhibits and more education. So, but that's for the future to hold. So, but I don't think we'll ever have, in a sense, a presidential library.
Angie's kids also submitted questions. Adam, can you wave at us? Adam would like to know how many rooms are in the Hermitage.
There are 15 rooms in the Hermitage, and there is a detached kitchen. So really there's about 16 rooms that you can go into. There's 4 rooms upstairs, 4 rooms downstairs, and then there's a library that was Andrew Jackson's office, a farm office, a dining room, a dish pantry, a storage pantry, and then the kitchen. So there are 15 rooms plus a kitchen.
Perfect. And Sarah, can you wave at us?
Hi, Sarah.
Sarah wanted to know what is the most expensive or valuable thing in our collection.
Well, one of the things as curators we can't do is say how much something's worth. So what I can tell you that the most valuable thing in the collection is the very first thing to ever be put in the collection, and that's the house itself. It probably would be the most valuable thing to try and replace. And it was the very first thing that was part of the collection. It was given to the Andrew Jackson Foundation by the state of Tennessee in 1889, and it's probably would be the hardest thing to replace and the most valuable. But it actually is an accession part of the collection. It's in the collection.
Okay. Cecilia would like to know if the grounds are open for walking.
Right now, the grounds are not open for walking, and hopefully, when we do open, a lot of folks will come out just to walk the grounds with social distancing. It is a great place to be. We have 1,120 acres and lots of pathways where people can walk around and relieve their cabin fever.
Jamie Gilbert, today was supposed to be her wedding day. They moved their wedding to October 16th, and she would like to know, is there a way to organize a group haunted tour for potential wedding guests?
Sure, I would think that would be something that we could do. It would probably be some small groups, as we're just going to be taking in a few people, probably a lot fewer people at a time when we start doing tours. But yeah, I think that's something that could be arranged, and I would reach out to Emily Dolch or Erica Clokey to arrange a tour, whoever it was that helped plan the wedding.
And good luck to you, Jamie. Amy Wolf, can you give us a wave? She would like to know your favorite preservation project at the Hermitage, what you enjoyed most about it, and how did it challenge you to preserve the home's integrity?
Well, I'm actually, I've got one that's probably my favorite, because I'm hoping that, you know, being person in charge of preservation here, there's been a lot of things done in the past that you just kind of scratch your head and say, what were they thinking? And so the one that I'm most proud of, and I think will have the most long-lasting impact on the foundation and the preservation, is again one of those projects that people really never see. In 2018, we upgraded the sprinkler system in the house to an automatic water mist sprinkler system. And with that, what we've done is that system is run through stainless steel pipes, and it can actually extinguish a fire much faster and use 80 to 90% less water. And that's real important when you're trying to preserve not only the house but the collection inside it. The less water damage you have, the better off it's going to be. And of course, being able to extinguish a fire quickly, which what water mist can allow you to do, will set the house up if there ever is a fire to hopefully recover a lot faster. And this system should last from anywhere from 100 to 150 years. Of course, pieces and parts of it might need to be upgraded, but the piping that is run through the building structure and in the ceilings, you know, we had to actually cut holes in the ceiling to put a lot of this piping in. That hopefully won't have to be done again, that level of intrusion, for about 100, 150 years, because this system is really built to last. In Mount Vernon, after we installed ours here, I like to say that we actually got ours before Mount Vernon did. Mount Vernon is installing a very similar system in Monticello, which is President Jefferson's home, already has one in place as well. So we're keeping up with the big boys in terms of presidential homes. And for me, the one that was the most challenging was the very first one that I was in charge of, which was doing $1 million restoration of the exterior of the Hermitage Mansion. And one of the biggest challenges in it is once we started to take off some of the siding and really get into the structure of the house, especially on the south or the front-facing side of it. We found a lot of problems with the structure, most likely caused by just decay and also the tornado in 1998. That roof that's over the over the porch on the front of the house, it looks like it was actually lifted up by the tornado and then dropped back down, because there were parts of the beams that run between the columns were actually broken. And so we had to go in and reinforce all of that with steel. And so it was sort of an unexpected engineering problem that we had to address, which was a pretty big challenge because it really inflated the cost of the restoration work. So but those are the two projects that I would point to.
Okay. We have two questions from Candy Perkins. Candy, you want to give us a wave? First one is, will the covered wagon tour be part of the reopening? And can you tell us how long the ride will be?
I hope it will be. You know, they can only fit so many people on the wagon. I think they can fit between 14 and 16 people per tour. And so when they restart the wagon tour to, you know, follow social distancing, they'll have to reduce the numbers and space people out on the wagon. We do have two wagons, and hopefully they can run both of them at the same time. But I do envision it being part of the reopening, and I would suspect that it would last its normal time, which is anywhere from 25 to 30 minutes.
And her second question, what were the attacks on President Jackson from the bank?
The attacks were, well, here's a good political cartoon to see how Jackson was treated during the bank war. So here's Jackson being roasted over the fires of public opinion during the bank war. And that's some of his opponents there talking about how they do barbecue in their various parts of the country. Martin Van Buren over there is a winged devil up in the right-hand corner because part of what Jackson's opposition would argue is that, because he was a national hero, instead of putting all of this on Jackson himself, they would say that Jackson's cabinet members and his kitchen cabinet and folks like Martin Van Buren were the people who were actually behind the scenes pulling the levers of power and saying that Jackson was just being led along by them. But Jackson, sort of boiled down the bank war. Jackson used the bank war to really kind of, and I don't know that it was intentional, but through the bank war, Jackson expanded the powers of the presidency. He used powers during the bank war that no president before him had really used. One of the first things he did is he vetoed the charter of the bank. And he made an argument that the charter was unconstitutional. But when it really boils down to it, Jackson was opposing the bank because he felt he just disagreed with the policy. He disagreed with how the bank was rechartered. And so he was expressing for the president, really for the first time, a ability to have a say in how legislation is shaped. And so he was also making the argument that he had that right because he was the sole representative of the American people. He was the only person, as he would argue it, that all of the people had a chance to vote for. And when he was elected, he felt he was elected with a mandate to do certain things. And he felt that he had the power to do that because the people had elected him to do so. And so what he made the bank war in the election of 1832, the bank war became basically the deciding question of that election. It was, if Jackson is elected, he's elected with the power to destroy the bank. That was what the people were going to express by re-electing him. And so when he was reelected, he continued to use the powers of the presidency in ways that had never been done before. For example, cabinet members are confirmed by the Senate. And in theory, the cabinet members have some independence. And no president had really ever fired a cabinet member before. And so Jackson really is the first president to demand that a cabinet member leave office. And so the Senate questioned him on his power to do that. And then eventually as he famously said, he took it on his responsibility. He removed the deposits from the bank and put them into a series of centralized or decentralized state banks. Through this whole process, again, Jackson is doing something that he really didn't have what Congress would say he had the authority to do. And so Jackson really reshapes the presidency in ways that we're more used to today. The president was no longer a sort of a weak executive just there to carry out laws. He was asserting a role for the president in shaping law. And so he was attacked for all of this because it was really kind of a revolutionary way to look at the presidency. and it wasn't what folks had been used to. And so, again, here, a lot of this was based on public opinion, and so that's what this cartoon shows, is Jackson being roasted over the fires of public opinion. And the reason why Jackson disliked the bank was he thought that it favored the wealthy aristocracy over the common man. He also thought it was because basically the bank held all of the deposits for the United States, and they used those deposits to grant loans. And the profits made from those deposits didn't go to the American people, they went to the stockholders of the bank. And those stockholders were wealthy Americans, they were foreigners, and so Jackson didn't feel like the government's funds should be used to make those folks wealthy. And he also saw it as a threat to national security because if all of these foreign governments and foreign people have control of the bank by being its largest stockholders, well, then they could use the bank to harm the economy of the United States. And so those were the reasons why he disliked the bank so much. So kind of a long-winded answer. I'd argue that the bank war was the most important part of Jackson's presidency. It really defined it. And so that's why it's a long-winded and complicated answer. I'm watching Dan Feller here to see if he's noddingly approving. I got a thumbs up, all right.
Hey. I think we have time for one more question, and we had one come in through the chat. Do you ever cooperate or coordinate with a Polk house since the two men were so close politically?
I've worked with them some on exhibits they've done, but there's not like a long-standing relationship. But I know Andy is working on a relationship with the Polk house that I'm sure she'd like to talk about for a second.
So back in, for President's Day, we launched a Tennessee Presidential Trail linking the homes of the three presidents from Tennessee. Would be Jackson, Polk, and then Johnson, whose home is in East Tennessee. So we launched that President's Day. Unfortunately, COVID-19 kind of shut everything down, so I'm hoping to get that back going whenever we do reopen. But there is a Facebook page, Tennessee Presidential Trail. There's also a website, TN Presidential Trail, and we're all sharing updates from all of our respective sites on those two assets. So I want to thank everybody again for joining us today. We hope to be able to reopen soon and see everybody on our site very, very soon. Until then, continue to follow us on social media and on our website. Thank you again. Have a great day. Bye for now.